counterterrorism operation targeting AQAP operative Abdullah al-Maliki, one of al-Shamrani's overseas associates, was recently conducted in Yemen. We will not hesitate to act against those who harm Americans. I would now like to turn the podium over to Director Wray, who will provide further information and an update on the FBI's investigation.
Thank you. First, let me say I deeply appreciate the Attorney General's leadership and support for the FBI, both in our relentless fight against terrorism and in our drive to obtain the vital evidence we need to protect the American people. We're here today because of a tragic reminder of just how grave, how imminent the terrorism threat still is. An al-Qaida in the Arabian Peninsula associate's murder of 3 people and wounding of 8 others right here in America. As the Attorney General described, through a combination of skill and determination, the men and women of the FBI have succeeded in accessing the terrorist's 2 phones, both of which he tried to destroy. Our investigation into December's terror attack in Pensacola continues, so there are limits on what I can say today, but this is an important moment in an important case. It's important because what accessing the evidence of this killer's phone allows us to do to protect the American people. In just a short time, we finally access that evidence. We and our partners have already put it to good use. Among other steps we've taken, just a moment ago, you heard the Attorney General describe the recent counterterrorism operation targeting Abdullah al-Maliki, one of the overseas AQAP operatives that al-Shamrani associated with while here in the United States. It's also important because it underlines just how serious our fight against terrorism is and how vital it is for the FBI to maintain its unflagging vigilance against the threat. The evidence we've been able to develop from the killer's devices shows that the Pensacola attack was actually the brutal culmination of years of planning and preparation by a longtime AQAP associate. The new evidence shows that al-Shamrani had radicalized not after training here in the United States, but at least as far back as 2015, and that he had been connecting and associating with a number of dangerous AQAP operatives ever since. It shows that al-Shamrani described a desire to learn about flying years ago. Around the same time, he talked about attending the Saudi Air Force Academy in order to carry out what he called a special operation. And he then pressed his plans forward, joining the Air Force and bringing his plot here to America. Thanks to a lot of hard work by our people, we now know that al-Shamrani continued to associate with AQAP even while living in Texas and in Florida. And that in the months before the attack, while he was here among us, he talked with AQAP about his plans and tactics, taking advantage of the information he acquired here to assess how many people he could try to kill. He was meticulous in his planning. He made pocket cam videos as he cased his classroom building. He wrote a final will purporting to explain himself and saved it in his phone. The exact same will that AQAP released 2 months later when they initially claimed responsibility. He wasn't just coordinating with them about planning and tactics, he was helping the organization make the most it could out of his murders. And he continued to confer with his AQAP associates right up until the end, the very night before he started shooting. Now, we're still exploiting the evidence we've now obtained from al-Shamrani's phones, and we're continuing to run our investigation, now with the benefit of a lot more insight into the murderer's mind and intentions, his relations with AQAP, and his tactics. We have more to learn, but we know enough now to see al-Shamrani for what he was, a determined AQAP terrorists who spent years preparing to attack us. We now have a picture of him we didn't have before we obtained this evidence, before we could confirm that his connection to AQAP was real, before we could track his long and methodical path to violence, a picture we would never have obtained without accessing his devices. This case is a potent reminder for anyone who needed one of the stakes of our work. We protect the American people from a staggering range of threats, but make no mistake, securing the homeland against terrorism remains our top priority. The men and women of the FBI are deployed around the clock, all over the country and around the world, identifying and disrupting threats and pursuing those who would do us harm. At the FBI, we remain laser-focused on the terrorism threat, not just because of how much damage an attack can cause our country, but because we also know that even as we speak, there are evolving and sophisticated groups around the world intent on striking us. Whether core al-Qaida or its offshoots like AQAP or ISIS or the many others, we are working with our partners to find and disrupt them wherever they are, whether they're plotting attacks on Americans here, at home, or abroad. Our people are attacking every aspect of the terrorism threat, international, like we're here talking about today, and domestic, with dedication and expertise, with innovation to more than match the evolving threat, and with a commitment to getting the job done right. On the topic of innovation, I want to thank and congratulate the men and women of the FBI who devoted months of hard work to accessing these devices. They successfully tackled a problem that required tenacity, creativity, and technical expertise. Those qualities are valuable in any organization, so I know how fortunate we are and how fortunate the American people are that we have so many people with those qualities at the FBI. That's why we work to recruit the kinds of people we do. The magnitude of the challenge they faced is hard to overstate. We received effectively no help from Apple. We canvassed every partner out there and every company that might have had a solution to access these phones. None did, despite what some claimed in the media. So we did it ourselves. Unfortunately, the technique that we developed is not a fix for our broader Apple problem. It's of pretty limited application, but it has made a huge difference in this investigation. While we're thanking the FBI's computer scientists, engineers, and other professionals for their hard work, we should also be thinking about the cost of all that work. Public servants, already swamped with important things to do to protect the American people, toiling through a pandemic and with all the risk and hardship that entails, had to spend all that time just to access evidence that we had court-authorized search warrants for months ago. Our engineers and computer scientists working to access these phones were also needed on other pressing national security and criminal investigations. But the delay from getting into these devices didn't just divert our personnel from other important work. It also seriously hampered this investigation. Finally getting our hands on the evidence al-Shamrani tried to keep from us is great, but we really needed it months ago, back in December when the court issued its warrants. In the aftermath of the attack, we and our Joint Terrorism Task Force partners worked urgently to collect and analyze evidence. In the weeks immediately following December 6, we conducted over 500 interviews of witnesses, base personnel, and the shooter's friends, classmates, and associates, among lots of other efforts. But because the crucial evidence on the killer's phones was kept from us, we did all that investigating, not knowing what we do know now. Valuable intelligence about what to ask, what to look for. If we had, our round-the-clock, all-hands-on-deck effort would have been a lot more productive. And now, months after the attack, anyone he spoke to here or abroad, has had months to concoct and compare stories with co-conspirators, destroy evidence, and disappear. As a result, there's a lot we can't do at this point that we could have done months ago. You'll hear more from the Attorney General in just a moment on just how vital lawful access is to every part of both our law enforcement and national security missions. Cybercrime, opioid trafficking, child sexploitation, you name it. Lack of lawful access affects every fight we're in. And Americans need to understand that this isn't just an issue for law enforcement. Lack of lawful access certainly affects our ability to do our jobs, but we know where the harm really falls when evidence is kept unavailable. It falls on innocent people, the people we're sworn to protect. In this case, we and our partners aren't the only ones who needed that information months ago. The victims, those who were wounded and those who lost loved ones, deserved to know then what happened, not to have to wait to hear it from AQAP months after the fact, when one of the killer's own associates, the operative Abdullah al-Maliki that the Attorney General and I both mentioned earlier, issued AQAP's claim of responsibility for the attack. We at the FBI never forget that 3 brave members of our armed forces were killed in this attack. They were Airman Mohammed Samah Haitham from St. Petersburg, Florida, Ensign Joshua Caleb Watson of Coffee, Alabama, and Airman Cameron Scott Walters from Richmond Hill, Georgia. They were serving our country, and they died as heroes. And we have them front of mind every day as we continue the battle against the same threat they did. I want to end by also extending my and the FBI's thanks to all of our partners. Our partners are essential to everything we do, and this case, in many ways, has been a perfect example of that. Our Joint Terrorism Task Force in Jacksonville and our Pensacola resident agency have led this investigation in partnership with their colleagues in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Florida, and with essential help from NCIS, Air Force OSI, ATF, Homeland Security Investigations, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The assistance of our state and local partners in Pensacola has been invaluable as well, as has been that of our intelligence community partners. And I especially want to recognize the brave Naval Security Forces personnel and deputies from the Escambia County Sheriff's Office who responded to that initial call for help. The Defense Department has also been an essential partner. In addition to DoD's work on the JTTF, the Navy officials in Pensacola and DoD personnel at all levels, both in Washington and around the world, have been vital to our effort to investigate this heinous attack and prevent others in the future. Finally, to the victims and their families, know that our work continues. Right now, we and our partners are exploiting the evidence from this investigation, pursuing the killer's potential associates and the new evidence that these devices can now lead us to. We and our JTTF colleagues come in every day dedicated to preventing terrorism from any place by any actor, and that work will never rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wray, and let me thank all your colleagues at the FBI for the outstanding work they have done in this case. And it serves as a reminder of the relentless efforts of the professionals at the FBI who every day stand on the ramparts protecting the safety of the American people. Now, while their hard work has led to this important breakthrough in this case, and this should be celebrated, I must also express great disappointment that it took over 4 months and large sums of taxpayer dollars to obtain evidence that should have been easily and quickly accessible when we obtained court orders. Apple has made a business and marketing decision to design its phones in a way that only the user can unlock the contents, no matter what the circumstances. In cases like this, where the user is a terrorist, or in other cases where the user is a violent criminal, a human trafficker, a child predator, Apple's decision has dangerous consequences for the public safety and the national security, and is, in my judgment, unacceptable. Apple's desire to provide privacy for its customers is understandable, but not at all costs. Under our nation's long-established constitutional principles, where a court authorizes a search for evidence of a crime, an individual's privacy interest must yield to the broader public interest. There is no reason why companies like Apple cannot design their consumer products and apps to allow for court-authorized access by law enforcement while maintaining very high standards of data security. Striking this balance should not be left to corporate boardrooms. It is a decision that must be made by the American people through their representatives. Public safety and privacy are not mutually exclusive. We are confident that technology companies are capable of building secure products that protect user information and at the same time allow for law enforcement access when permitted by a judge, as Apple had done willingly for many years and others are still doing today. Many of the technology companies that advocate most loudly for warrant-proof encryption in the name of privacy rights are at the same time willing to accommodate authoritarian regimes when it serves their business interests. For example, it has been widely reported that Apple has worked with both the Communist Party of China and the Russian regime to relocate data centers to enable bulk surveillance by those governments. Apple also has reportedly disabled features and applications on iPhones used by pro-democracy advocates, thereby facilitating censorship and oppression. If technology companies like Apple are willing to oblige the demands of authoritarian regimes, they certainly have no excuse for failing to cooperate with rule-of-law nations that respect civil liberties and privacy rights and have judicial safeguards. The developments in this case demonstrate the need for a legislative solution. The truth is that we needed some luck here, in addition to the ingenuity to get the phones this time. There's no guarantee that we can be successful in the future, or that we can avoid massive delays, in this case more than 4 months. These will have significant consequences for the American people. In addition to the cost in time and money of devising alternative methods of accessing encrypted information, it can be enormous. This is not a scalable solution. Right now across the nation, there are many phones, both at the federal and state level, that we still cannot unlock despite having court orders. As commercial encryption becomes more sophisticated, our odds of success diminish with each passing year. We cannot do our jobs when companies put the ability to defeat court-authorized searches in the hands of terrorists and predatory criminals. When combating threats to our homeland, we need American tech leaders to work with us, not against us. Over the past year, I have repeatedly asked tech companies to work with us to provide better solutions. Unfortunately, no progress has been made. For the safety and security of our citizens, we cannot afford to wait any longer. Thank you. That's the end of our prepared remarks, and we will now open it up for questions.
We will now begin the question and answer session. To ask a question, you may press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. If you are using a speakerphone, please pick up your handset before pressing the keys. To withdraw your question, please press star, then 2 at any time. When you pose your question, please state who the question is for. At this time, we will pause momentarily to assemble our roster. Our first question comes from Pete Williams with NBC News.
Hi, Pete.
Mr. Attorney General, 2 questions, if I may. You said that al-Shamrani was associated with al-Qaida in the Arabian Peninsula. Would you describe this as inspired or directed? And secondly, President Trump has recently said that he wants to see the Justice Department prosecute figures of the Obama administration, President Obama and Joseph Biden, for what he calls crimes. Is that something DOJ will do?
Okay, let me ask the director to respond to the first question, and then I'll come back and answer the second.
So, with respect to al-Shamrani's connections with AQAP, I think we are describing today what we're able to share at this point. Some of it is very much ongoing as we exploit different leads coming out of his 2 devices. It is certainly more than just inspired. We know, for example, that he was sharing plans and tactics with them. We know that he was coordinating with them and providing an opportunity for them to take credit for the attack. And so I think I'll have to just, for the moment, stick with some of the verbs that we've used already, and more to come on that as we continue to build out what we now.
Pete, I'm not going to comment on President or Vice President Biden, for that matter, say in connection with their campaigns, but I will address the role of the Department of Justice. I think, as you know, I've commented since I have been Attorney General and even during my confirmation hearings that over the past few decades, there have been increasing attempts to use the criminal justice system as a political weapon. The legal tactic has been to gin up allegations of criminality by one's political opponents based on the flimsiest of legal theories. This is not a good development. This is not good for our political life, and it's not good for the criminal justice system. And as long as I'm Attorney General, the criminal justice system will not be used for partisan political ends. And this is especially true for the upcoming elections in November. We live in a very divided country right now, and I think that it is critical that we have an election where the American people are allowed to make a decision, a choice, between President Trump and Vice President Biden based on a robust debate of policy issues. And we cannot allow this process to be hijacked by efforts to drum up criminal investigations of either candidate. And I'm committed that this election will be conducted without this kind of interference. Any effort to pursue an investigation of either candidate has to be approved by me. Now, what happened to the president, and I've said this many times, what happened to the president in the 2016 election and throughout the first 2 years of his administration was abhorrent. It was a grave injustice, and it was unprecedented in American history. The law enforcement and intelligence apparatus of this country were involved in advancing a false and utterly baseless Russian collusion narrative against the president. The proper investigative and prosecutive standards of the Department of Justice were abused, in my view, in order to reach a particular result. We saw 2 different standards of justice emerge, one that applied to President Trump and his associates, and the other that applied to everybody else. We can't allow this ever to happen again. The Durham investigation is trying to get to the bottom of what happened, and it will determine whether there were any federal laws broken, and if there were, those who broke the laws will be held to account. But this cannot be, and it will not be, a tit-for-tat exercise. We are not going to lower the standards just to achieve a result. The only way to stop this vicious cycle, the only way to break away from a dual system of justice is to make sure that we scrupulously apply the single and proper standard of justice for everybody. Now, under the long-standing standards of the department, criminal charges are appropriate only when we have enough evidence to prove each element of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the standard we're applying. Now, I have a general idea of how Mr. Durham's investigation is going. And as I have indicated, some aspects of the matter are being examined as potential crimes. But we have to bear in mind what the Supreme Court recently reminded us of in the Bridgegate case. As the court said there's a difference between an abuse of power and a federal crime. Not every abuse of power, no matter how outrageous, is necessarily a federal crime. Now, as to President Obama and Vice President Biden, whatever their level of involvement, based on the information I have today, I don't expect Mr. Durham's work will lead to a criminal investigation of either man. Our concern over potential criminality is focused on others. Thanks for your question, Pete. The next question.
Our next question comes from T.J. Thomas with ABC.
Hi, Pierre.
Good afternoon, or good morning. Thank you for the time. Question number one, I have two questions, is what can you say about the relative strength of al-Qaida in terms of what this case shows and what it says about the Saudis' ability to vet people before they send them to the United States? And then the second question has to do, you've made clear that neither the Vice President Biden or former President Obama are currently the subject of an investigation. Can you make it clear what group of people are you focused on in terms of possible wrongdoing and or abuse? Are we talking about FBI officials or intelligence officials, or both?
Thanks, Pierre. Let me just take the second part first. Obviously, with Mr. Durham's work underway, I really cannot comment on specifically who is being looked at. But I think we're all familiar with the set of circumstances that is generally being reviewed. On the first part of your question, let me just say something briefly about the vetting process. Obviously, before this incident, it was not sufficient. The Saudis have been fully cooperative throughout this investigation up till now. We're working closely with the Saudis, and the Defense Department and the Saudis have been working to buttress the screening process and the vetting process to ensure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Now, as to the relative strength of al-Qaida, let me ask the director to comment on that.
So, Pierre, on the issue of al-Qaida and its relative strength, I think what this investigation reveals is something that we've been saying for some time, which is that al-Qaeda's offshoots, including AQAP, remain intent on attacking us wherever they can, including here in the U.S., if they can find a way to do it. I think it also illustrates just how dangerous one operative can be, and the number of ways in which we can be hit if we don't stay vigilant. And that's why counterterrorism remains our #1 priority, and why our JTTFs all over the country and all of our partners are so focused on this issue. It's important that Americans not get complacent, because the threat is real, it's still here, and we're determined to thwart it.
Thank you.
Next question.
As a reminder, if you would like to join the queue, please press star, then 1. Our next question comes from David Martin with CBS.
Thank you. Two questions. Terrorism operation against al-Maliki. Was it an airstrike, and did the operation kill him? And second, did the information in the phones implicate any of the other Saudi pilots at Pensacola, for instance, the ones who had dinner with al-Shamrani the night before, or the ones who used their cell phones to record the actual shooting? Thank you.
As to the first part, I'm afraid we can't get into further details. When we were talking about earlier the question of the relative strength of al-Qaida, the al-Maliki group has been seriously degraded, and I'm very pleased with the results of the counterterrorism operation, and believe that it has further degraded the capabilities of al-Qaida on the Arabian Peninsula. For the second part of the question, let me turn to the director.
So at this stage, in terms of our exploitation of the information on al-Shamrani's phones, we have not identified any current threat here in the U.S. Or current operative here in the U.S. based on that information. Now, it's certainly a very ongoing investigation, and certainly there are questions based on the information we now have that we would have liked to have been able to ask while he was here. So more to come on that.
Take one more question.
Our final question today comes from David Spunt with Fox News.
Yes, hi, how are you? Thank you both. You mentioned that President Trump specifically got in touch with Tim Cook at Apple. That didn't seem to do anything. Obviously, do you feel like Apple is moving the needle at all, or do you just seem, obviously I know you want this to be a good conclusion, or do you just think this is going to be a standstill for years to come?
No, I've seen no sign that Apple has moved the needle or is willing to try to move the needle. You know, this is not a unique situation. Businesses frequently make products that, if allowed out in the market in the form that the business may optimally want, could create dangers to public safety. And normally what we do in that circumstances is we don't leave the decision up to the business about the exact details and configuration of their product if we feel that it will cause harm to the public. That decision is not left to the business. It is a social decision that is made by our society, made by the public, in the public interest. And we see that with restrictions or limitations or required features that are sometimes imposed on manufacturers to make sure the public is not put in danger. So this is nothing new. This is what we normally do. But for some reason, there are some tech companies who feel that they're above that, and that they unilaterally can make decisions based on their business interests and regardless of the dangers posed to the public, and we cannot let that happen. So with that, I conclude the conference today, and I again appreciate all of you attending.